Special meeting for March 3rd, 2025, and we're excited to be here. We are. So first of all, I think we should let's do a roll call and then roll. All right. So first we do a roll call, and Adam, do you want to do a roll call?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So Adam,
I am here.
Lisa,
Here.
Jay,
Here.
Pete, Joe,
Here.
Brian, Ann, and Wayne, and Jessica. Okay, we do have a full board tonight.
Beautiful. All right. So I think it makes probably most sense to see, right, for everybody. So now we're going to have a full board, and you guys are going to be most likely on both these, all three of these proceedings here. So we will sit Jessica for Ryan, and we will see Joe for him. All right, so we have some minutes. Everyone have a chance to review. I'll get them kind of last minute there, but
I have none.
Okay. Also had a chance to look at them.
We're all quite good.
Okay. We're looking for a, how are you, Jessica? Would you have a chance to, I know you were at the meeting, but we're not seated at this time.
Jessica Ramsey Ramirez. Or is that wrong?
Sanchez.
Sanchez Ramirez.
Ramsey Sanchez. Second here, anyone have
I wasn't.
entertain a motion?
I wasn't present, but I read the minutes.
Okay. So Joe and Lisa
Lisa was the one
were
who-
both seated at the time of myself.
So I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to accept. We have a second. Would have to be you, Joe.
I'm gonna abstain again, I haven't read them.
Me, I don't think we can have a,
We couldn't.
with three people.
We can wait till the next regular meeting to vote on these minutes.
All right, so I think I make a suggestion that we move to review these next scheduled meeting.
I'll make that motion.
With that motion, second on that?
Second.
Second, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All are good, good faith and good timing. Okay. We have a couple public hearings, actually 3 public hearings in front of us. Adam, why don't you kick us off with the first one here?
Absolutely. First, let's do a regional impact.
Okay.
I move that there is no regional impact to these 3 hearings.
Second that.
Second, all right, so moved and seconded that this, none of these have rose to the level of regional impact. So all those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those not in favor? Okay, aye as well. I would agree.
So
Okay, so we pick those 3 off. Minutes, all order, public hearing number 1.
So, the first public hearing tonight is EBA 25-002. Special exception, Black Belt LLC has requested this application for a special exception to section 5, article B2G to construct a drive-through facility in the business district. Subject property is at tax map 220, lot 5. A quick staff note is that this application does meet all ordinance requirements. Specifically in relation to stacking rings.
Excellent. Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, so when we open up the public hearing and please tell us what you'd like to accomplish.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Adam, again, my name is Mark Godry of Civil Works New England. I'm a professional engineer here in New Hampshire, and with me this evening is Lonnie and Stephen Giordano with Black Belt, who are the owners and applicants. And we went over this project in detail, last week, but I could do a quick, overview again with the board if everybody can see it okay. But it's a proposed, drive-through, restaurant. I know we had at the planning board meeting the other night, some discussion about, you know, what type of use right now they're, the Giordano's are leaning towards, like a coffee shop type use, but, they have not, they don't have any, you know, tenants lined up or anything like that just yet. So it's, you know, we're kind of looking at it more of a generic type, restaurant type use now. And, which is important to note is a allowed use in the business district. This property is entirely within the business district, and the residential district actually starts a couple hundred feet up the road from, you know, from us. So, into the Marcy Hill Road, you know, neighborhood. So the property is at the intersection of Marcy Hill Road and Route 12. And we are, looking to have, you know, nowadays, some of these types of uses, have no, interior seating. A lot of them just have drive-throughs, but this one, we are planning for people to be able to come in off the road and park their cars and go in or go through the drive-through. And we're proposing to, which is a little different than you may recall than the plan that was actually originally submitted. But we do have a exit driveway now, out onto, Route 12 directly out of the drive-through area, with a, exit driveway onto, Marcy Hill Road to accommodate people that might be parking in the parking lot, but also the Marcy Hill Road neighborhood. And access into the site would be off of Marcy Hill Road, which was, something that came out of discussions that we had with the, you know, the town at informational meetings, you know, last fall. So something that's really important as it relates to the drive-through and the special exception is that we have a dedicated, entrance lane right here that will go all the way down through the drive-through area. And we have two drive-through windows, on the plan that were submitted with the, you know, actually in our plan set. And something that I might have, misspoke a little bit, last time was that I think I did with the planning board, was that I misspoke to say that the, town's, drive-through regulations require 9 20-foot long spaces, vehicle spaces, but it's actually 8. So I know there was some concern at the planning board about, well, if you start measuring the 9 at the drive-through window, you know, what does that do? And, you know, so, but now if you discount that 20-foot long vehicle, now you're really starting right in here, and we can fit, you know, 8 vehicles to, you know, easily onto the property as shown in our, I think in fact on our drive-through, you know, exhibit plan over in the corner, we show 9 vehicles there, but it would actually be 8 according to the ordinance. So the drive-through lane does not block any of the parking spaces, which is a requirement, I believe, in the ordinance also. We have a dedicated lane coming in that could go just into the parking lot. And it's you know, kind of a similar use to the Dunkin' Donuts that's at 47 Monadnock right now in town, where people come in off, you know, Park Street off the side road and would be able to exit out onto Route 12. So it's similar to that use, but I think we actually have, as you can see, quite a bit more stacking ability for vehicles on the property itself. So you know, the lane widths are, you know, 12-foot wide. And a change that we did make before the planning board meeting was, there was a little bit of confusion where this bypass lane was only 10 feet wide. We were trying to minimize impervious, but we've now made both of those lanes 12 feet, so there's no question. And something that was important from, again, this is site plan review and whatnot with planning board, but we had a driveway out at this location at one point that Joe DeRussa, the DPW director, didn't like this. He wanted it removed to fully comply with Swanzey's driveway, regulations. And, so we pulled that back and had also added the lane at that point out onto, Route 12, which has gotten conceptual approval from, New Hampshire DOT District 4 also. So, anyway, the driveways are, in line with, the town's DPW directors, thinking the local driveway regulations, state, etc. So we believe that we are, fully compliant with the, the various regulations that are applicable to the, not only the site design, but the actual, drive-through itself, which I think is, quite important. So, as I kindly spoke to earlier, that it does meet the regulations. Now, the facts supporting granting of the special exception, if I could just go over those quickly. The as stipulated in your application, are there similar uses in town that are already authorized in the district? And the answer is yes. I already spoke to the Dunkin' Donuts at 47 Manhattan. And the approval would not reduce the value of properties of any property within the district, or otherwise be injurious, obnoxious, or offensive to the neighborhood. And again, as I spoke to, the driveway is more than 200 feet from the residential district and quite a ways away from the nearest house, actually, and is compliant with town of Swansea driveway regulations, and with the state of New Hampshire regulations, as I mentioned as well. And it meets, got adequate site distance. It's on a nice straight level stretch of Marcia Road and whatnot. And it complies with all the town's regulations otherwise. And or entirely, not otherwise. There will be no nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians. And there are no sidewalks out on Marcia Hill Road now or Route 12, but there are full pedestrian access provisions inside and as part of the site design itself. And the exit driveways will be stop controlled. As you're probably aware, the planning board has, I think I mentioned, maybe might have mentioned it last time, but the planning board has asked that we provide a traffic study for the project as well. And we are in the process of getting that going. So we've been continued by the planning board to be able to get basically the traffic study completed and whatnot. So I think the traffic study is going to prove out that it does not have an impact to the to the roadways. Obviously, that's going to be important. And we certainly would welcome any condition of the board's approval that it be also approvable by the other boards of town and whatnot. So it's so that is that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board or the public might have. And thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'll start with the board. Is there any questions that the board would have to the applicant on the use of
I've
the property?
got a couple. You talked about the driveway, the exit driveway onto Route 12, the conceptual approval from the state. What does that mean?
What it means is we provided a plan to the District 4 DOT, and they with the geometrics of the driveway, the location of the driveway relative to the Marcia Road intersection and whatnot, and they came back and said we conceptually approve it, obviously subject to going through the DOT driveway permitting process. So, but we are very confident that we'll meet those requirements. They didn't flag anything.
I'm just not familiar with the term conceptual approval from the state. Seems like they approved, or they say, or hey, we'll wait and see what your formal application looks.
Yeah, and there was little bit of back and forth with Joe DeRusso and you know, DOT also about the locations of the driveways and everything else. So I mean, both are okay with the locations. I think DOT would have said we got some serious problems with this if, you know, so, but we got to go through that process.
So you don't have actual approval yet, but they're
Right.
giving you the indication they are favorably on it, as long as you don't screw up your plan.
I don't want to speak for DOT, but I would say it's approvable. You know, if we meet their various, you know, other requirements that you have to do, like. Site distance and things like that, for example. Yep.
And another question, and this is maybe, given my history on a planning board, maybe I've had my planning board hat on, not my zoning. But there is an implication on what you're asking in terms of the special exception. Now you say, you know, we don't know what's going to be there. It's likely a coffee shop. How can you do a traffic study? What will you assume in the traffic study for the amount of traffic this business will generate?
Yeah, what we'll do is look at a couple different ITE standard, use codes that have trip generation information, and we could look at a couple different scenarios in the traffic study, but we had the same question, a similar question came up at the planning board meeting the other night, and if the use ends up changing dramatically from what the town reviews and approves, if they choose to grant approvals, of course, then you know, we would have to come back. If the trip generator is gonna generate way more traffic than we anticipated, then obviously we'd have to come back and, seek some kind of amendment from, say, a site plan review approval or something, so yes.
So if we were to approve the special exemption, and I don't know where it'll wind up, there could be a condition that planning board approves the traffic study.
I think that would be appropriate. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from members?
I have a couple questions about the incoming lanes. So you have two incoming lanes.
Right.
Okay, and one of them, you called it a bypass lane?
Well, one lane would come in here, go to the parking lot.
Okay,
And-
so that's if you're going inside.
Yep. And then this would be the drive-through lane, which we'd mark, and people would be able to do that to get into the drive-through lane. Now, if somebody, say you're queued up, something happens, it's like, this is taking too long, I gotta get out of here, or you get a call or whatever, you need to jump out of the lane. You could then get out of the drive-through lane and into the bypass lane and then exit without having to stay in the queued up in the drive-through lane.
Right, that was something I was going to mention, because I don't know if anybody else has gotten stuck in the line at Dunkin' Donuts. You can't escape.
It's not a pleasant experience.
No,
Right.
you're trapped. You cannot get out of there. So I wanted to know if there were going to be curbs or anything that would keep people
No.
locked in there.
What this is, just a concrete pad that we typically put in the drive-through area, but it's flush. And there is no curbing. This is a lane stripe. Because we definitely wanted to clearly delineate the drive-through lane versus the bypass lane. So, and
So-
people could also exit this way if they wanted to. Because the reason I say that is one comment that DOT did have was that they didn't want this to be bi-directional. So ideally, they didn't want people coming out of the parking lot and doing that and conflicting possibly with traffic here trying to exit. But somebody could do that to get out.
So also, I'm not sure, I don't travel that way in the mornings and during, kids going to school and people getting out of work. I don't know if there's a traffic backup from Marcyville trying to get onto 12. I'm not sure how the traffic flow is there in the morning, but I could picture people coming down the hill and seeing a line of traffic and go, well, I'm going south, so I'm just gonna zip through this parking lot and take a right and go south.
That was one reason another reason why DOT didn't want this to be, that it's interesting you mention that. They were thinking that somebody might try to do that. And people might be less inclined to go all the way around. But that's why DOT wanted this to have 2 lanes headed north.
I would think if you were going to be turning right and there's a line of traffic waiting for the people who are turning left, they're gonna zip through that parking lot.
Well, I mean, you can't control entirely people's behavior. People
Right.
cut through parking lots all the time, at corner lots, and, you know. I think that's just reality.
Mhm.
But again, this. You know, this meets all of the requirements of the town's, ordinance relative to drive-throughs. In which a larger problem obviously would be if now cars are starting to back up, because this is really short, say the building was here. Now cars are starting to back up onto Marcy Hill Road.
Right.
That would be definitely more of a concern, and I think which is why. The town's regulations call for 8 vehicles that are 20 feet long. That's a pretty sizable vehicle. So very conservative.
Okay, thank you.
You know,
But again, those will be, that's really the planning board's purview to review and approve the
it's
traffic study.
yeah, it's part of site plan review also, yeah.
Yeah, our focus is on the use of the property and the.
Right.
use. Any other members of the board have any other questions? I'm gonna cite one thing myself, real quickly, and I'll open up to. I know one of the other applications that you guys had was reviewing the site for, for the septic system and for, disposal of water and so forth. And knowing the result of that, have you guys taken consideration? Because one of the things we have to do is adequate, appropriate facilities will provide for the proper operation of proposed use, and that's definitely one of the operational necessities is getting rid of water. Have you guys considered an alternative approach?
For septic or
For some of the leach.
yeah. There. If I can show you the. So. This is the entire property that was purchased from the town of Swanzey. And here's the building site we're talking about right now. This is like a 60 scale, the other one's a 20 scale. So to put it in perspective. But there is other soil we found suitable for septics on the other side of the wetlands, to the western side of the wetlands, like up in this area. And it was actually I don't know if it was at this board meeting or the planning board, but there was an entire warehouse facility that was proposed at one point on this property. Right up in this location, that I think they had their septic system right in this area that was proposed. So there are alternatives on the site, but I think, like we said, last week at the board meeting, it just seemed to make sense to us to have it disposed of in a location that fully exceeded the requirements of New Hampshire DES, and that had no potential wetland disturbance. Where to get into one of these other sites, we have to go underneath the wetland with a force main. But there is absolutely other suitable areas on this site. So let's speak to the other water, stormwater, if you like.
Sure.
This stormwater basin right here is basically designed to pick up all of the impervious surfaces from the entire site. And I think we have 4 catch basins on the site that would drain over into this stormwater management basin with a slow release out to the south that would exceed actually all of New Hampshire alteration and terrain requirements. So the larger project would have to go before AOT. So this smaller project has to fully comply with AOT requirements also. So we're actually reducing peak flows from the site for all design storms. And when we changed the driveway configuration, we actually, including making that driveway a little wider, we were able to make some adjustments to the site itself that we actually are reducing the amount of impervious cover on the site at this point. So then what was originally proposed. So,
Thank you.
welcome.
This is a public meeting, so anyone else in public has a question? Yes, sir.
Bob Goodrich, the exit out onto Route 12. Will that be crossing a wetlands?
It will be crossing the wetland area.
So
Yeah.
you'll have to go to another board to get a variance to be able to do that?
Only if town meeting adopts that
I understand.
bylaw change.
You're right.
Yes,
Okay,
which I believe is next week.
right. Thank you.
Joe DeRusso, the Public Works Director. I didn't get a chance to meet you ahead of time, Mark. You speak of how far out are we on the traffic study for this?
Well, I'm hoping to have a proposal in a day or two, and then we are probably looking at realistically maybe end of the month to get the study actually done.
Okay, as you indicated, the entrance off of Marcy Hill Road does meet our driveway requirements. I'm just a little concerned, like I said, when there's been kind of unknown as far as what's gonna go in there for a business, what type of traffic we're gonna see. I've had members of the public bring it to my attention, and which we're all aware of, the design up at Dunkin' Donuts up at off of Route 12 is. You go up there in the morning and Park Street's loaded with traffic, and we just. Part of my reason being here is concerned about that happening, and the big issue on Route 12 is we're not dealing with the 30 mph up on Park Street, we're dealing with a lot of traffic. And there is a significant flow coming out of there, especially in the morning at Marcy Hill onto 12, does not have the best visibility. So my concern is just that anything goes wrong in the drive-through, we're gonna have traffic backed up out on Marcy Hill, creating more of a traffic concern. That's why I'm interested in seeing the traffic study and seeing what the final design of this is going to be. Have you given any thought to that, or what, that, I know you referenced the Dunkin' Donuts up on Park Street, but have you given any thought to that problem?
The problem is that, they don't have a tenant lined up. They're really not even talking to anybody right now, is my understanding, because most people are gonna wanna see an approved site plan. You know, and all right, what do we, and I think it came up at the planning board meeting the other night too, that if the tenant coming in wants something different for a site arrangement or something, we would have to come back to the board. So, it's, you know, it's a little speculative right now, but I think our company worked on a Dunkin' Donuts in Dover, New Hampshire. We had 26 seats, had, you know, like 7 or 8 employees. So that's what we kind of modeled this on right now. I think the building itself from a occupancy rating or whatever is like 30 people. So, you know, we said, all right, let's presume there might be 30 people in there. We exceed the parking count for that loading. And so anyway, but you know, we understand that you know, if anything significant changes, we have to come back. And it's going to be I mean, you know, frankly, we got a proposal for a traffic study end of last week, and it was you know, quite a significant scope, and it was also quite a significant fee. And so the owners wanted to obtain another proposal, so we are working on that presently. So it's and we just heard at the planning board meeting, you know, a couple of weeks ago that they even wanted a traffic study. So it's you know, those folks are pretty busy right now, so we're trying to get it done as quick as we can. So in the planning board, no doubt hearing process will be continued until we have the traffic study done. But I think if this board was to grant an approval of the special exception subject to the planning board review and approval, then I think the town's covered.
I have a question from a Zoom member, and you might have already answered this. The exit lane onto Route 12, is that both directions or is it a right only?
Right now, it's proposed to be both directions. And that's the way it was shown concept on the plan that we had sent to DOT, so.
That was actually gonna be my question. Have you considered making it a right turn only?
If the. And I don't know if that is frankly anything to do with the drive-through itself, other than as far as the special exception, but if the traffic study. One of the things we're gonna be studying is, besides the intersection of Route 12 and Marcy Hill Road, are the intersections of the driveways. And if the traffic study came back and recommended that be right turn only, then that's what we'll do. You know, we're not gonna go against the consultant's recommendations, and they would, obviously, the traffic consultant is going to study that would be acceptable to DOT. So DOT finds that left turn objectionable, then we're gonna do whatever we're gonna do to get a New Hampshire DOT driveway permit, so. But we prefer that it be bi-directional right now. Not in, but just exit right or left, north or south. You know, just if there's somebody coming up from the south and, you know, wants to go out and they're headed into Keene for some reason, you know, to the school or whatever, you know, we'd want obviously the ability to turn left. Which I think is the way the dunks in Swanzey now, you can turn either right or left out of it.
But they do have the option of going back around,
Yes.
coming out on Marcy.
Yep. Because that'll be directional on this, so they could do that, absolutely. Yep.
Of course, the Dunkin' Donuts is not a really good example because you can turn right out of there and go around the traffic circle right away and go back the other way. You don't have that option here. I just want to point out that it is important to us to know the way in which you might exit that exitway, because we have to look at, and I'm struggling with, we have to look at whether there's a nuisance or serious hazard to vehicles or pedestrians. And so we need to consider that fully and understand what's going to go there. And what you're saying to us is that we have to wait for the traffic study to really understand that, which makes it really hard for us to come to grips with that question without that traffic study.
Yeah, I'd agree definitely, because it's the unknown.
One of the things that the board is gonna have to take into consideration is adequate facilities on the site for the proposed use. So without a traffic study, you have no idea how many people could back out. If you've seen the Dunkin' Donuts up on Court Street in the morning, they are coming all the way around and coming to the entrance. So I mean, successfully, that's a very successful place. But there's some misgivings about that. So I think the traffic study is just really important. The left and right hand turns off Route 12 are really important. Because you do have an exit, but that means someone's coming all the way through, getting their coffee, coming back up through a traffic area that's a parking area, and then back out again. It would be hard for them to support, I think, to know whether or not there are adequate facilities being provided. Because I think you have to presume success. These are very successful restaurants, pretty much wherever you can cite them. And I think your best customers are going to come off of Marcy Hill almost every day automatically. So it deserves, everyone needs to know how this is.
They have to come off Marcy Hill.
Oh, I realize that. I'm just saying that
The people that live on top.
they're up the hill and they're going to be good customers. And I think for them, yeah, the neighborhood up at the higher area.
They
Yeah,
may be going to Keene after they get their coffee, so they may want.
very many of them.
They may want to go left.
And yet,
That's
Would I be amiss to say that a better comparison would be the Dunkin' Donuts that's on Route 10? Because that's a 40-mile-an-hour zone there. And you've got left-hand turns coming out of that parking lot going toward Keene. You've got Base Hill Road right there coming out, and that is a hot spot for accidents. It is, because of all of that crisscrossing. That was why I asked about the right turn.
It's our purview to look at, lots of sites and so forth within the city, or for the town, in terms of comparisons and so forth of use. But a lot of it has to do with the neighborhood itself as well, specifically this area, but it's a good example of something that's occurring, especially with speed, I would say.
The town's regulations for drive-throughs, they're not required, traffic studies to be performed. So, that's why I guess I'd like to say that, I think the conditional approval by this board would protect the interests of everyone, because we still have to go through the planning board site plan review.
If I were you, I'd be in the same position. But why not wait? You can't proceed. If we give you a special exemption, nothing's not gonna break ground. You gotta wait for planning board approval. So why not get that first? Well, excuse me, why not the traffic study done first before you apply for this special exemption? Doesn't seem like it holds your project up.
Could I have 2 minutes to talk to my client?
Can I just say something real quick?
Sure.
The traffic study was only an issue at the last meeting, which was 7 days ago, 8 days ago. So that's, we were already on the docket for this meeting.
Right, that is true.
So this has already been in progress for months before our traffic study was even mentioned.
By the planning board.
Yes,
Now, independent of whether the planning board required it or not, I think would have come out of this meeting as a requirement for it.
but that has nothing to do with what
Oh, absolutely does.
we're here for the drive-through.
And the traffic will affect the utility of the drive-through.
A quick procedural point, a ZBA typically comes before planning board in most cases. Not all cases, but in most cases, ZBA comes before planning board. I'm not saying that's how it has to go in this situation, but just historically, that's how that works, that organization.
And I think the reason for that, Adam, if I may, is that the planning board doesn't want to grant necessarily site plan review approval of something that the zoning board hasn't even reviewed yet.
Exactly.
I want to point out that I don't think it's the applicant's fault that this is coming to us without a traffic study. I don't think it's their fault at all. It's a matter of timing but I am struggling with how to answer the question if there's no nuisance or serious hazard or whether there's adequate appropriate facilities. That's the yeah, drive-through seems to me, in terms of the number of cars and the spaces there, seems to be better designed than some that I've seen.
Let's give the applicant a second to come back.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
after consult with the owner applicant, we would like to continue this hearing, if we may, until a date ideally after the traffic study is completed, which will probably put it in line around the same time. I don't know timing wise, but when we're before the planning board for site plan review, to review that same study.
Okay. Well, from a procedural perspective, we have to, as a board, decide if we would like to hear the case as it stands, or grant the applicant the right to have a second hearing or opinions to this. So is there any questions amongst the board as to concerns, one way or the other?
I think if the applicant is willing to continue it, I think that's the better approach. Personally.
I would like to move that we accept the applicants.
Just one more procedural thing. I know from a timing perspective, Adam,
90 days.
we're at 90 days, so the application has first come to us. Do we have the time to do that?
I need to see the stamp on when this was submitted. If it's at that point, we need verbal confirmation from both parties that you want to move past that 90-day period.
but that's all we need, right?
As long as both parties agree to move past that 90-day period and it's in the minutes and it's on video recording, you are good. Yeah.
The same that came up with the planning board, but their clock 65 days.
Yeah, there's a different clock. Yeah.
And I was gonna ask you, it's from the date of it's submittal of the application.
Correct. And
So that's the clock?
yes, and I need to check the date on that.
Okay.
I probably have it here. I don't have it.
That sounds totally fair.
As it stands in front of us, so not only will we have to grant a continuous if that's what we choose as a board. I think it would be in good interest to also say that we'd be okay with an extension beyond the 90 days if it was indeed beyond that.
Absolutely.
Make sense?
Mhm.
Everyone understand that? Okay, is there a proposal or a motion?
My motion is that we agree to continue this to a later meeting, once the traffic study is over, that we agree that an extension is, we're past the 90-day requirement.
Is there a second to that motion?
One second.
Second, is there any discussion on the motion itself?
Mr. Chairman, if you haven't closed the public hearing, I believe you'd be better served to do a date and time certain to your April meeting. And then because otherwise you'd have to renotice for all the people here that want to, that are interested
Mhm.
in the
Good
hearing.
point, Bill. So I'll amend my motion to say that we continue this to the April meeting. And at which time we hope the traffic study has been completely, traffic study has been completed.
Would it be the April meeting or the March meeting? This is.
We're in March meeting.
Yeah,
This is a special meeting.
this is
Special
special.
It's a
meeting.
special
So we have a
meeting, sir.
March meeting coming up later this month. Right.
Our next scheduled meeting is the 17th of March.
I'm not sure that there's enough
I
time.
don't know
to
if
get
that's
the
an
traffic
adequate
study.
amount of time based upon what we've heard for that to occur.
If we stand by for just 1 second, I will pull up the exact date.
The exact date is the 3rd of January. Is the date of the signature on the application.
Sorry, I was meeting the date in April 21st. It should be the 21st.
That's past 90 days.
Right.
Right, which
That's
is-
90 days.
yeah.
So my motion is that we continue this until the April 21st meeting. And that we approve an extension beyond that 90-day limit. With the understanding that the applicants agree to that.
I have not closed, we haven't closed the meeting here. The applicant does have one more, and procedurally, I think we should probably
We need to
close.
close the public hearing.
All right, so we'll do one more discussion. Do you have one thing else that I'm gonna close
Just
it out?
real quick, although if I could ask for a continuance until the March 21st meeting,
April,
no, March,
March 17th.
March 17th,
March
is the next
17th.
following meeting.
which is 2 weeks from now. By some miracle, the study might be done by then, so, and if we. I'm happy to even, ask for a continuance in advance of that night, if clearly the meetings that the hearing is not gonna, the traffic study won't be done. As opposed to waiting for like 6 weeks from now, or 6-7 weeks from now, realistically. We'd like to keep this moving forward and,
Understood,
yeah, so
understood.
that would be my only comment on that.
Okay, and so I'm gonna officially close the public hearing at this point.
Can't do that. You gotta continue it, you can't close it.
I'll continue for, for the discussion amongst the procedurally.
Yep, so the public hearing remains open until the date and time certain, which is March
Okay.
17th. So.
All right,
We don't have to close the public hearing.
Exactly.
We're not closing the public hearing.
My motion, I'll try to.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, make the motion, please.
My motion is that we continue this item until the March 17th
Mhm.
meeting. And that in the event that we need to exceed the 90-day limit, we agree to do so,
That's
And
great.
the applicant agrees to that. also.
and the applicant agrees to that.
Speaking to the applicant, we agree to that right now.
Okay, both sides, both parties, and we're on camera, and it's on the minutes. Is there a second?
Want to read that back to us, Adam?
Yep, so Jay Ward moves that the meeting is continued to the March 17th zoning board meeting. Also the board agrees that the applicant may extend past the 90-day period to act. The applicant is in agreement with that. I'm gonna word it better. Yes, the applicant and the board are in agreement that they may extend past that 90-day limit
If needed.
90-day period act.
If needed.
If needed, yeah.
I second it.
Okay, it's been seconded. Discussion amongst the motion? They were all in clarity? Okay, so all those in favor of the motion, please say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those in disagreement? All right, the ayes win.
Excellent, thank you. We'll
Thank
be in
you.
touch.
Okay, let's move on to the next item on our agenda. So Adam, can you please kick that off for us?
This doesn't decide, they'll know at that time whether they cross the wetlands. So they might need another variance.
One at a time.
One of them.
All right. So the next item on the agenda is ZBA 25-003 variance. Fieldstone Land Consultants, on behalf of Sapphire Business Park, is requesting a variance pursuant to the proposed amendment to section 7, article B of the zoning ordinance to allow a wetland crossing to access a large dry upland area. Subject property is shown at tax map 209 lot 4 and is in the industrial park district. If we can stand by for 1 second, I want to explain why this is coming before the board. So this is kind of funny, and it's what we were talking about a little bit with the last applicant. We have a proposed amendment on the town meeting agenda or the town meeting warrant article for disallowing wetland crossings as an approved use in the wetland conservation district. Kind of complicated. We currently allow a wetland crossing. But because of this amendments, building permits cannot be issued for this project 120 days prior to warrant article. This means that the applicant is unable to proceed with their plans. The only avenue forward for the applicant is to request a variance. This is the only way the applicant can seek relief. It's passed through 2 lawyers. So this has been double and triple checked. This is the only way for the applicant to proceed. I know it seems strange, but we have verified that this is a good course of action for the applicant.
Does everyone understand what Adam's referring to? Okay. And why I felt.
I understand, I'm just a little confused. So in 8 days, we'll know whether it's a zoning ordinance or not. So and I'm not proposing this, the other approach is wait until after next Tuesday. And potentially a variance won't be necessary.
Correct.
Didn't I understand the situation correct?
Yep.
I'd like to speak to that if I could.
Please do.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brandon, civil engineer with Fieldstone Land Consultants, representing Asher Construction and Sapphire Business Park LLC. Although, you know, it may seem that waiting 8 days is reasonable. The reality is in 8 days, if that regulation passes, we then have to ask for variance. That then needs to be noticed, that then, you know, could be another 30 days out, and it has a significant impact on construction timeframes. I don't want to speak for both applications, but this is kind of just an open dialogue here. One application, there's interested parties looking at, you know, a piece of property, and so it is at this moment compromising potential sales and, you know, development in the town. So although it does seem like it's only 8 days, it's actually, you know, much longer than that. And, you know, ideally, from a professional standpoint, I wish when, you know, warrant articles were posted that we didn't have to design to them until they actually passed, you know, the town vote. But because by law, we have to design to them, by law, we also have a right to request relief from them. And as this board knows, we were here last week, so it was 14 days then, and now it's 8, and. All in the meanwhile, we have interested parties that, could be, floundering and looking at other properties. And so out of the respect for my clients and certainly, frankly, for the community, I think it's important that we go forward here. We're in a, we're in a, TIF district. It's an incentive district. And I'll touch on all those elements as we proceed, but.
I appreciate your perspective on that. It lends some clarity to, I think myself at least, and I think others as well, in terms of the relief. Yeah, works both directions.
Right, it has to work both ways, and I think that's what, Adam was touching on, is a reviewed by 2 attorneys. Because there has to be a mechanism forward that is in the interest of both parties.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.
All right, I think we proceed forward.
We'll proceed, okay. So we're here this evening for this application seeking relief from Article 7, Section D of the Wetlands Conservation District under permitted uses. Currently in that district, number 11 under the permitted uses says the construction of streets, roads, and other access ways and pipelines, power lines, and other transmission lines are permitted. Currently, there is a proposed modification to that particular section that says that you may maintain, repair, or replace existing and lawfully located structures, public utilities, streets, roads, access ways, provided that the work conforms to general standards adopted by this section. When I initially read that, I thought that may actually include still the construction of streets and roads, but in reviewing that with town staff, they felt that that wasn't the case, and we therefore need a variance. That's why we're here. I personally think there may be some unintended consequences to the proposed language of that section. And I just want to state that, for the record, I think, I have spoken about this regulation at a couple public hearings in the past. I do believe that the Conservation Commission has done a lot of work to try to come up with, some wetland regulations, and I think that some of the terminology may have fallen short at this moment, which is why we're requesting relief. But I think there's a lot of good efforts in momentum that's been put forward. But unfortunately, because of the way that particular sentence reads and the interpretation where you can't cross a wetland, that now becomes a pretty significant impact on landowners. It's essentially a land taking when you really look at it in its simplest form. And we'll touch on that when we look at both of these applications that I have before you this evening. So I just wanted to kind of preface my presentation with that because I do think there's been a lot of great movement in dialogue, and I've done a lot of research, so I've seen the reports that were put out, and I think in its totality, there's a lot of good topics and things that'll likely come forward in hopefully correcting that language down the road. With that said, Mr. Chairman, we are before you requesting a variance from the Wetlands Conservation District. And that variance will allow, my client, in this case, to access a large upland area on their property. So this property is tax map 209 lot 4. I'm going to show you kind of the survey plan. This is Sapphire Drive here. So if you come off of Route 12 and you're coming down Sapphire Drive, it's the first commercial industrial lot on the right-hand side. We obtained an approval on this lot for a contractor bay facility. And that approval contemplated kind of the front portion of the lot here. That went through site plan approval, have all the necessary permits for it. My client actually started to do some construction on the site. And ultimately what he found is that in completing kind of the market study, that he could use some additional parking and storage on this lot. There's a lot of I'm sure just from a practical sense, if you think about an HVAC or a plumbing or electrical company, they can have a fleet of vehicles, 4 or 5, vehicles in a fleet. They need to be able to park those vehicles on site. And so he started looking at this property and saying, how can I generate a little bit of extra space so that I, that those clients become, a valuable market that they can hit, that he can hit, excuse me, rather than, missing that opportunity. And so when we look at this with him, he has about an acre of land on the other side of a wetland area that bisects the lot. So it's a 6.88 acre property that's highlighted in the blue here. And then you have the wetland areas, which are highlighted in green. Unfortunately bisected by, a wetland here. My client, this property does not have frontage on Sapphire Drive in this location. There's actually a spike strip that comes down through here, and unfortunately kind of cuts that access off. We did evaluate that. That property is owned by Clearwater Pools here. And so there was no ability to get an access easement, from that landowner. There wasn't any interest there. And so now the only way to access that buildable area, it's about a third of the buildable area on the lot, actually, when you start to take a look at it, is to cross the wetland. Wetlands generally are regulated by the state. The state regulates wetlands through the Department of Environmental Services and the Wetlands Bureau. They're given authority through the Army Corps of Engineers under the general problematic permit. So typically, we would have a wetland crossing here that we would size an appropriate drainage structure that would get reviewed and approved through DES, Department of Environmental Services. We would make sure that, the driving factors for a wetland permit at the state are avoid and minimize. And then depending on how much you're impacting, mitigate. If you impact over 5,000 square feet of wetlands, then you have to enter into that mitigation component. If you're under that and you've avoided and minimized and you've sized your, your drainage crossing appropriately, you would meet the standards for a crossing. And so what this plan shows, I just wanted to kind of give everybody some perspective. You have 3 contractor bay buildings, have some parking in front of the units, and then we would have this area out here that would provide additional storage, etc. We would have to go back to the planning board for a site plan amendment for this, but it doesn't make any sense for us to do that until we, are successful, hopefully, in securing this variance. This wetland impact would be about 2,000 square feet, pretty minor wetland impact. Sapphire Drive, when that was constructed, had wetland impacts associated with it. Most of the projects that we've worked on in this community has had wetland impacts associated with it. Just on this same road, the Flatley development had wetland impacts. Nanotech had wetland impacts. This area in the state has a lot of forested wetlands. The goal is to impact, avoid, minimize, but then impact the ones that, have the lower functions and values. And that's part of that state permitting process typically. So I just wanted to touch on the project as a whole before I got into the criteria, and certainly I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have as we work through, the 5 criteria this evening.
And what are you proposing to facilitate that crossing, the bridge or?
It would be just this one here would probably be a 24-inch high density polyethylene culvert with head walls on each side, just a typical oversized driveway crossing.
Okay.
Now, the state will ultimately evaluate whether that crossing is appropriate enough based on the type of wetland and the, the hydrologic, the watershed characteristics, if there's, if that's large enough. But that's what I would anticipate there.
Okay.
Yeah, this is actually just a, just a forested wetland, kind of just a saddle. It doesn't have any pooling water in this area. It's not a flowing, brook or anything like that. This is just kind of a wetlands finger at the toe of the slope. Fairgrounds are situated over here, so it just essentially kind of bleeds out of the, the slope, or, in order to be a wetland, you're within 6 inches of the seasonal high water table within a certain period of time throughout the course of the year. Has vegetation, has the soils, has the, you know, the hydrologic conditions, so it's a wetland. But not a high functioning, you know, wetland. This is a standard, you know, forested, pedestrian wetland in, you know, in New England, New Hampshire especially.
Chad, how far down is the water there? Have you done testing at all?
We've done a number of test pits. I mean, so, you know, the water table through here is probably 6 to 12 inches, would be my guess. We did not dig any test pits in the wetland. This area here is actually a really nice kind of gravel, material. And so there's quite a lot of depth to seasonal here. So if we're successful, some of the materials here would actually get utilized for the construction, and which would help offset some costs as well.
Okay.
We did do test pits all over, you know, on this site, and generally speaking, it's like 48 inches or so the seasonal on average throughout the site. Yes, ma'am.
So just to clarify, if we were to grant this variance, it would depend on what the state says as to the type of the wetland, and then the crossing would be constructed such that it would meet all their requirements for whatever was needed for whatever type of wetland it is.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. The other thing to consider here is, you know, this is Sapphire Drive. This is, you know, we're in the industrial park district. We're in the wetlands conservation district, but we're in the economic revitalization zone. The town voted, you know, to really promote commercial industrial development here. I personally think that this regulation creates a hardship for both parties. Because it restricts development potential in an area where you have municipal sewer and water. And in an area where the town has decided this is where we need to get, you know, commercial and industrial property and development. There's always balance with development. But there has to be a process that you can address balance. And, you know, we've talked about this with Adam. You know, I personally think a conditional use permit is a more appropriate avenue for regulating wetland crossings or buffer impacts, because it allows for a, you know, holistic discussion about, you know, what parts of the property need to be preserved, how can we approach this from a productive planning standpoint and kind of balance, you know, the development. No is never the right answer, and that's what a variance is intended to be. It's supposed to be no, unless you can prove, you know, 5 criteria. We're asking for a variance today, you know, on 2 fronts. We have to, because the regulation's been posted. But also, we don't think this regulation should be a variance, you know, should be regulated through variance. It's very negative for development. It's a bad posture, I think, for the community to take, and I think that there needs to be some education, you know, brought to this front, because I think it's unintended. I think the language is unintended. I don't think that, you know, any of the research that we've done points to the town wanting to say no. But that's the reality of what we're facing, you know, in 8 days. So you have you know, the community has a chance to fix it in 8 days and make sure it's not an issue for this coming year. Otherwise, you guys are probably going to be busy with some variance applications, you know, so prepare yourself. Just to be honest. And we're in the tax incremental financing district, which I was referring to, you know, the TIF district here. And it's finally getting developed. I mean, we've done 2 or 3 projects here. You know, there's been a lot of energy around a couple other properties along this stretch. We're going to talk about one of them in the second application. But there's, you know, I think there's a lot of really good things happening here, and so this would be, you know, this would really, you know, be an impact on, you know, the remainder of the land, because as you can see, there's wetlands, you know, that we have to contend with to access upland areas throughout this property that the town decided to put in this district. So I think there's some, you know, conflicting, I don't want to say agendas, but conflicting language for sure. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to go into the 5 criteria or address any questions that the board may have at this time.
Not any questions, you can start the question. Please.
So the first criteria, granting the variance would not be contrary to the public interest because it's gonna sound very redundant this evening, but you know, just to put everything on the record, I will be kind of walking through the criteria that we've submitted with the application. The zoning for lot 2094 is the industrial park district, as well as the economic revitalization zone and the tax increment finance district. These districts exist to stimulate economic growth and facilitate business development. Lot 2094 is well suited between Route 32 and Route 12, with a suitable area for commercial development and infrastructure on the lot. It serves the public interest to make the most of the tax investment that has been put into this area over the past decade. Granting this variance will allow for the productive use of the lot. Town voters approved the creation of a property tax exemption program for new commercial and industrial construction in 2020. Indicating the expansion of commercial opportunities is something that the voters want in Swanzey. Allowing for a wetland crossing to access roughly 1/3 of the buildable area on this lot would be consistent with, you know, all of those efforts in the past. It is our belief that this proposal will have no negative impacts to the public, as the crossing will be designed to minimize impacts, will utilize best management practices, and will require permitting from the Department of Environmental Services through their wetlands program. For all of these reasons, we believe granting this variance will not be contrary to the public interest. I'll move on to number 2 if you'd like, Mr. Chairman. Number 2, if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed because we believe this proposed wetland crossing is reasonable and meets the spirit of the ordinance, especially when you consider the reasonable manner in which the crossing is proposed. One of the purposes of the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District is to prevent development of structures and land uses on wetlands, which would contribute to the pollution of surface and groundwater. By meeting all of the other local and state requirements with the proposed crossing, that we talked about earlier, we believe we can safely join usable portions of lot 2094 without polluting or destroying wetlands. We will certainly have a minor impact, but there'll be, you know, a drainage connection. We'll still be maintaining and preserving those other wetland areas. Another stated purpose of the district is to encourage those uses that can be appropriately and safely located in wetland areas. And we believe a responsibly built crossing would satisfy this purpose and would prevent the destruction of wetlands. State regulations would closely govern the installation and maintenance of any approved crossing. The wetland crossing would not threaten the health, safety, or welfare of the public. And for these reasons, we believe granting the variance required for our proposal would observe the spirit of the ordinance. Number 3, granting the variance would do substantial justice. Granting this variance would allow for the productive use of this property and the productive development over a 6.88 acre property. That does have, you know, obviously some jurisdictional wetland areas. The proposal is to access the dry upland portion of the lot where the most contiguous developable area exists. Denying the variance would essentially result in a land taking from the owner, as a considerable portion of their property would be rendered useless since it would be inaccessible in any meaningful way. The gain realized by the public in denying this wetland crossing is far outweighed by the benefit realized by both properties, or excuse me, both parties in our opinion. That being, of course, the owner and the public, because again, the voters in Swanzey have taken votes in the past to promote this area And so we really have to look at the general public, which is, you know, the residents of the community. Allowing commercial development will stimulate economic growth and improve job creation. Granting this variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the safety or general welfare of the public. For this, and all of these reasons, we believe granting the variance would do substantial justice and allow for the productive use of this property. And we do believe that the current proposal is reasonable. Number 4, if the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished. I go through quite a few details there, but you know, realistically speaking, there's no proof that there would be any, any negative impacts done to any surrounding properties. The development is a conforming use. Generally speaking, our experience has been that new development actually increases surrounding property values, especially when they're conforming and compatible. And so I'll save some time in reading that whole paragraph unless the board.
I'll just suggest, I know all of the board read at least a lot of this, and we had this in front of us beforehand, so I appreciate your thoroughness.
Yeah.
And if there's anything further you want to add to any of these, or you can continue.
I just don't want to take any chances.
Yeah,
I'm
I
here for a
understand.
reason,
I
and I want
understand.
to make sure we put it all on the record.
Sure,
So.
it's your moment here.
And so the unnecessary hardship is the final criteria. Owing to special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, denial of variance would result in unnecessary hardship because no fair and substantial relation. The first prong here is no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. We do think that this property, is unique in many ways. We've touched on a lot of those things. I mean, the geometry of this property is unique. The fact that we don't have frontage on Sapphire Drive, so we can avoid, that wetland crossing to access, a third of the buildable area. That's unique. It really speaks to the need to cross that wetland. And then, of course, there's the fact that, the other components that were in the industrial park district, that were in the TIF district, that were in the ERZ district. It's our belief that the development of this property is reasonable and fair when you contemplate the purpose of the ordinance provisions and the specific application of those provisions to the property. Certainly a denial of this variance creates significant hardship as it is essentially, as we talked about earlier, land taking. And so the owner should have right to utilize their buildable area on their property, especially when it's significant in size. This is about, an acre property. That's a pretty significant size, piece of land that, will be very productive for hopefully businesses that will be occupying this site in the future. We therefore don't believe that there is any fair or substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. The regulation should seek to minimize wetlands, but should not seek to violate landowner rights to access and reasonably use their properties. And that's the first prong. I've touched on, the second prong is the proposed use is a reasonable one because, and I've really touched on, all the reasons that we think this is a reasonable use. And I'm happy to continue to, to reiterate those topics if the board feels that it's necessary, but you do have that, that particular one in the application. So I'll try to save everybody from hearing the same thoughts.
Thank you. Excellent.
And then part B is something that I'm happy to go over if the board feels that it's necessary. But that's only required if we haven't met the first two items of the hardship criteria. And so I would simply ask if you want me to address that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to do so. But if you think that we've satisfied, or if the board feels that we've satisfied the first criteria, then I can save everybody some time there. So I don't know if you want to, touch on that or But I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
I think it makes most sense to get everything on the table now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got a different vibe earlier, so I was trying to throw it out there as an option. So part B states if the criteria in subparagraph A are not established, explain how an unnecessary hardship will be deemed to exist if and only if owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, the property cannot be reasonably used in strict conformance with the ordinance. A variance is therefore necessary to enable reasonable use of the property because. When we were addressing this criteria, we focused on, the buildable area of the property. When you think about 1/3 of the area is really bisected by this wetland. It is certainly reasonable for somebody to want to utilize 1/3 of their buildable area, especially when we're talking about an acre or more of land mass. And so that's what we really touch on here. The subject parcel is 6.88 acres in size with frontage along Sapphire Drive, situated between Route 32 and 12. It is currently a vacant lot, and proposed to be commercially developed. We believe that the shape and location of the property and the fact that it's bisected by a large wetland area are special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area. The unique shape of the lot with the wetland limits, with the wetland limits the property's reasonable use, and therefore variances required or necessary in order to connect those buildable areas together. Denying this variance would limit the development potentially for a property in the town's ERZ and TIF districts, where development should be promoted as a significant resource has been spent and allocated to provide municipal sewer and water services to this area. Not allowing reasonable development would contradict the past efforts and result in significant losses, not only to my client, but it is our belief also to the town, from an investment tax-based standpoint. Utilizing the entirety of the dry upland area on the lot is the most sensible way to develop this property, as it will provide the most marketable area and will allow for more businesses to occupy the site. We believe the proposed development is a reasonable use of the land and harmonious with the surrounding neighborhood. This crossing would minimize environmental impacts and will be designed to meet local, state, and federal requirements.
Thank you. All right, so any questions the board members have for now to the applicant?
I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned and your application talks about the state needing to approve it, both the installation and the maintenance. And as we saw sort of in spades in July of 2023, the non-maintenance of culverts was certainly a mitigating factor in some of the destructive flooding we saw. What does the state typically require in terms of maintaining a culvert like that?
Sure, that's a great question. So the majority of the issues that you see with existing culverts has to do with the design storms that they've been designed for. Right, so DOT culverts have always been designed for the 25-year storm. But it's not today's 25-year storm, it's yesterday's 25-year storm. The state has us utilize extreme precipitation tables when we're sizing culverts. So in general, these crossings are oversized, and so you would not typically experience issues with a new crossing because of the way that things are designed today.
What do they design to?
100-year storm is pretty common now.
Which is happening, what, every 25, 30 years? Yeah.
So the 100-year storm technically has a 10% chance of happening every year. And so. It's, I mean, that's the reality, that's what people don't understand, right? And so, it's happened more frequently than that. But it's the back-to-back storms that really create, the problems. And, frankly, the intensity of the storms are, really the issue. Storm frequency events are modeled over a 24-hour period. When you're getting a lot more rain in a shorter period of time, the intensities are the issue. That's what causes the erosion and, the soil loss and stuff like that. So the state does their part in, doing the best that they can to apply the extreme precipitation tables, and those do change over time. But they far exceed what local standards are, and so they have us use those. And then there's, recommended, maintenance as far as, semi-annual inspections, stuff like that. You'll see those on the details of the plan.
And who polices that?
Nobody really polices that. I mean, everybody has to be responsible on some level for their own, infrastructure and drainage.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna open this up to the public as well, so if there's any questions that the public at large has as well.
I got a couple, I don't know if it pertains to this board, but if that 1 acre is not utilized, what impact does it have on taxation? I mean, if we add something to it, does it increase the taxes, which profits the people of Swanzey? And the other question I have is, how close to Route 12 will that be? And will it be visible? I mean, we already see enough stuff on Route 12 now. We don't need any more.
Happy to answer that if you'd like, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, speaking to the, the taxable portion, certainly the footprint of the commercial development will be larger, so there is an inherent increase in the tax, structure that will happen if, this is developed. As far as where is it positioned, it's behind, Clearwater, development. And we're actually down in elevation, about, just so you know, it's about 15 feet down in elevation, so you won't see it from, Route 12.
It's in the little model there, you won't see that model.
I'm well aware of where it is.
I know you've walked all over that.
And just for the record, the consideration of tax generation and tax revenue is not part of our purview as it relates to the variance. So I appreciate your comment, but it's not something that we're considering in terms of how we do this.
Yeah, Keith Tebow, I represent Page Homestead Housing, which is in a butter, interestingly enough, to this property down the ways. I just have a couple of questions and maybe a comment. The comment first, the issue of contractor bays. I know it's not something the board wouldn't make any decision upon, but we don't have enough of them. I think one of the things that limits the industry is trying to do this out of your garage or some other place. So I like the concept of these, the fact that it can't be seen. I think that's probably true. This is clearly an unusual, one of the most unusual sites I've seen, given the how it's nestled in there, and it's completely surrounded by another property. Given it though, is that it's contractor based, is there any, probably not required, but and maybe this is beyond your purview, Chad, but you said 2 or 3 vehicles per bay. That's a lot of gas and oil coming off the site just in motor vehicles. Contractor bays could have significant amount of materials stored for use constantly. Is there any in the industry itself or in the plans for this, is there any kind of ways to contain that? So that if indeed something happens in one of these bays, it's not going directly straight down, that there's a way to filter or impede or otherwise take care of, 2 gallons of motor oil that might just come out of a barrel that happens to be on site. Something like that. You get what I'm talking about, but is there anything that's proposed, contemplated, or can be done to contain potential contaminants that would come from this use?
May I answer that, Tracy? Yeah. It's a great question. So when we designed this first, what is now the first phase, I guess you could say.
Okay,
Wasn't intended to be the first phase out of the gate, but there's closed drainage system that's designed with that. And so we have hoods in the catch basins, which are basically, it's an oil water separator.
Okay.
So it's got a permanent elevation of water in it, and then oils in petroleum fuels float. And so that's kind of your first line of defense.
Okay.
And then they run, from structure to structure. So you have kind of some redundancy. And then there's the drainage, basin in the back. So that's one thing. And that's just good parking lot design, because every vehicle that, drives down the road has the potential to, to create a problem. We would anticipate kind of a similar design back. This has not been designed
okay.
here yet because we have to be successful this evening. But we would anticipate a similar, design here. Interestingly enough, the way that Swanzey handles users in these types of facilities is every use either has to get approved by the planning board or has to go back to the planning board. So every time somebody's interested in occupying any one of these units, it goes to the planning board. And they evaluate that use and kind of evaluate the same concerns that you've raised,
Sure.
which are valid. And so there's, there is a review process that contemplates and, that and tries to take into consideration, if the right users are occupying these.
Fireworks storage, anyway.
Yeah, I think, Keith, that that's not really a consideration for this particular hearing, but we're looking at just the wetland crossing. And that, in the variance, the site plan's already been approved for what you see up there. And further site plan review is gonna happen at the planning board. So I think we're limited to whether or not the ordinance they should be excused from the ordinance to build them.
Yeah, that was much more personal.
Yes, I thought so, yeah, but
As to how it gets dealt with.
as an abutter, you need to know that.
Thank you.
Any other members? So thank you, please.
I get a question on an application last week affecting the wetlands. The Conservation Commission weighed in. Have they provided any input on this application?
No, I have received no comments on this application.
And they're aware of the application?
That's a yes.
No, 2 members of the Conservation Commission are here, myself and Bob, and we can affirm that we have discussed this and we have not chosen to send anything in town.
It seems inconsistent with the zoning ordinance change that the Conservation Commission
You might think so.
generated.
I can expound on it if you want, but I'm not sure I'm liberty to speak completely on behalf of the Conservation Commission, except to say that what we proposed to the planning board did not get adopted in total. So what is on the warrant is a piecemeal business of what we proposed. And in the process of discussing with the planning board and so on, we've come to the realization that, as Chad said, we need, for regulations like this, we need an alternate way for these matters to be decided when we have situations like this where the only way to use the property involves a little bit of crossing of the wetland. So we're not particularly happy with what's on the warrant, the Conservation Commission. And we would like to see it redone, and we're in the process of working with it. So I'm going to work with together, planning board members and Conservation Commission members to redesign that ordinance for next year's elections. So we on the Conservation Commission have very mixed feelings about whether that particular provision should pass in the election 8 days from now.
I appreciate that, Jay.
Yeah.
As it relates to this, though, any of the testimony and so forth, we need to look at what the packet is. But I appreciate your input as it relates to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts? Everybody's good. People comfortable to move forward with the questions that we have at hand?
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very thorough and lets some clarity into this issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing at this point, and we'll move forward with the questions. Sound good? All right, any thoughts, any concerns, anything I want to bring up?
Public input, not public hearing.
Public
I think
hearing,
you're closing the public input.
public hearing.
Public hearing.
We now can only speak to ourselves, we can't have input from them.
At the hearing, is that what we.
The public aspect of this hearing. is being
Public
closed.
input. Okay.
All right. Well, let's just go ahead and start right into it then. All right, so could the variance be granted without being contrary to public interest? Jessica, just so you're kind of aware, I think you saw it last time, we go around, you know, in terms of answering each of these questions individually. And then ultimately we'll tally up, you know, the votes, and then we may be forced to vote a certain way just based on people's voting behavior as it goes through. It's all public and it's the way we've done it with that. Versus just making one decision right at the end. That makes sense. All right, so could the variance be granted without contrary to the public interest? I'll start with you, Jay.
I say it could be granted like contrary to public interest, because I believe the public interest is, and this is specific to this particular property, which is in the industrial district. I think that the intent of the voters was to allow this district to be developed, and therefore the public interest is best served by granting this variance. So I will say yes.
Excellent. Jessica.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Lisa.
Yes, same reasons, James.
I will agree as well. I think Jay made an excellent point. I agree. So yes. All right. So second, would the spirit of the ordinance be observed within the variance if the variance is granted? Yeah.
Yes, and I think I wish the Conservation Commission had provided some input, but in the absence of that, the applicant has compelling arguments, so I would say yes.
Excellent, Lisa.
I agree, yes.
Okay. Jay.
I say yes, because I think the ordinance that we're talking about is meant to protect the wetlands. And I think the building the proposed access way with a culvert, it does protect the wetlands. It doesn't block off a portion from another. It allows the wetlands to be connected to each other, and therefore it is not damaging the wetlands, and therefore the spirit of the ordinance is observed.
And then Jessica.
Yes.
And I would agree as well. And I think part of the spirit of the ordinance is also developing the property itself. It needs to be relief, you know, in this case. So I would say yes as well as an additional point. All right. Would granted variance do substantial justice? Jessica.
Yes.
Joe.
Again, I'd say yes, and the applicant has some very compelling arguments.
Lisa.
Yes.
Whatever that is. All right, Jack.
I think for some of the same reasons I mentioned in the first two cases, first two questions, I think it does grant substantial justice. I always try to weigh the justice to the applicant and the justice to the public of the town. And in this particular case, there is very little injustice done to the town and very much justice done to the applicant. And overall, the town benefits from this. So I think that substantial justice is done. I'd like to remind every one of us that when we answer these things, yes or no, we're supposed to give the reasons. And you can say it's the same as somebody else's, but you need to give reasons, because that's what the courts are looking for if they're on second guesses.
Appreciate that, Jay. Appreciate that, Jay. And again, so I will just say, I look at this again in the inverse. A lot of these questions I do, would this do, injustice to the town or injustice to property owners that would abut. And I would agree that, you know, this is taking into consideration the concern about the wetlands, but it's doing it in an appropriate fashion, and also gives substantial justice to the property. And you're looking at, as the applicant had stated, a third of the buildable property being torn off from the rest of the buildable lot. So from that perspective, yes, it would do substantial justice to the parcel and the applicant as well, without doing substantial injustice to the town at large. So yes. All right, could the variance be granted without diminishing surrounding property values? Lisa?
I'd say yes, because we've seen no evidence at all. No testimony that it would have done anything to diminish the values. So yes.
Jay?
I also say it could be done without diminishing surrounding property values. And I think the argument is that it will actually increase the surrounding property values.
Jessica?
Yes, for the reasons that Lisa and Jay stated.
And Joe?
Yes, and as I said before, I think the applicant has provided some compelling arguments that I don't think I need to repeat for the record.
Thank you, Joe. And I would agree with everyone else's sentiments. I don't think we've seen testimony that is in the negative that would diminish property values in any way, shape, or form. And I think development of this particular parcel is an intention the town has had for a long time. So yes, my answer. Do special conditions of the property exist that diminish it, or sorry, distinguish it, not diminish it, distinguish it from other properties in the area? Start with you, Jessica. What do you think?
I think yes, because like you said, the geometry of the parcel, the fact that there's that section that they can't get to from Sapphire Drive. I just said something, they got a spike strip or something. that
Yes,
they
it's
could
a
not get.
sliver there that
Yeah.
gives it no access to that particular part.
Yeah, so that's special, you know, that chunk of the property can't be used without crossing, so all those things like could be special.
Okay. Joe?
Yes, ditto my other comments.
Okay. And Lisa?
Yes, I agree with Jessica. There's no access to that piece off Stafford or 12, so yes, special conditions exist.
And Jay?
Yes, I would add to what other folks have said and say that the other special condition is that it is in the industrial park. That matters a lot to me in terms of how I feel about this property.
I would also agree with that. I think there's quite a few aspects to this particular lot that lend itself to be, you know, distinguish it from other properties even within the area, but, you know, its intended use as well. So I would agree with you, Jay. Echoing, you know, the rest of the board sentiments. All right. Lastly here, owing to the special conditions of the property to distinguish it from other properties in the area, there is not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and the specific application of the provision to the property. Check.
I'm always have to stop and think this one through because it's the one that's poorly worded. I think that the public purpose of the ordinance, we're talking about a variance to the wetland ordinance that's on the ballot for March. But we also have the other ordinance, which is the industrial park, establishment of industrial park ordinance, and that's part of the specific special conditions this property has. They're conflicting uses allowed here in some ways. So I think there is not a relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and the specific application, so I say yes here, because the general public purpose of the ordinance is to protect the wetlands and wait a second. I'm gonna pass on this one while I think about it a little longer.
Okay. Jessica, you want to take a stab at your thought?
Sure.
Okay.
So I agree with everything that Jay said right up until the point he stopped. And there is not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and specific application of the provision of the property. He just did a thorough job of going over everything. I don't see where saying no. I don't see how we can say there is a fair and substantial relationship. Therefore, we have to say yes.
I'll come back to it now, and I will say that the purpose of the ordinance is to deny access way across the wetlands. And I think that the specific application of this provision to the property is because of the special conditions of the property. I don't think it applies, because I don't think that this access will harm the wetlands. So I think I come down with yes there. It's very hard for me to move that much. But I do.
Okay, excellent. I think between the two, perfect. Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Jessica. So, Joe.
I struggle with this one. Again, with lack of input from the conservation, official input from the conservation commission. And the ordinance doesn't even, it's not even in place. So it's tough to read into what the true objective is. And therefore I have trouble then making a judgment vis-a-vis this application. So for this particular one, I would abstain. I just don't have enough information to make that determination.
Okay. Lisa.
I'm going to say yes, because of everything that Julie just was.
And I'm also going to take that being chairman, you get one benefit, you go last. And I will say that combined, everybody has kind of clarified my position, which is yes. And I think you supported it with struggling through the language, which is not easy on that particular one. But ultimately, I'm in agreement that, that yes is the correct answer as a result of what you guys stated. All right, last, is the proposed use a reasonable one? Not necessarily last, but the next, is the proposed use a reasonable one? We'll start with Joe.
Yes, it is reasonable for the input from the applicant.
Lisa.
Yes, I think Chad gave us a lot of good information, so yes, it is very reasonable.
Jay.
Yes, I think it's reasonable to expect the applicant to want to connect the upland portion of his property.
And Jessica.
Could I just ask for clarification on the proposed use of what variance?
I think it's the proposed use here, the reasonable one would be the crossing of the wetlands.
So
Is that a
the
reasonable?
variance to the ordinance that says cannot cross.
Correct.
Possibly might say cannot cross.
Potentially.
Is the crossing itself.
Okay,
Right, and I
yes.
think we have to assume that, in our reasoning, we have to assume that did pass 8 days from now. We have to
Right,
sort of
yes.
Put
So
ourselves in the future.
I just want to make sure I was knowing what I was saying yes to.
Sure.
Because it doesn't really say the use of.
Yep.
Yes. It is reasonable. they can't get to it, and I agree that it is a bit of a land taking without that provision.
I would agree. I'm gonna say yes as well, and I think going back to the fact that this particular lot only has so much buildable land on it. And it is a reasonable request, you know, or use to be able to cross a very small portion of wetland. And doing it in a reasonable format to achieve that, so I would say yes as well. All right, seeing that we have determined that in AI and a double I, that we are pretty much in almost lockstep agreement with it. You don't have to move forward to the next question. To recap, it's almost unanimously yeses across the board for everything. So I would entertain a motion on this application.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve CBA 25-003.
Is there a second?
Seconded?
Okay, seconded. Are there any discussion on the motion that has been presented? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous in the ayes. There we go.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving forward, Chad. Okay, well, let's start Adam on the.
Yep, so we're gonna go into CBA 25-004, also a variance from Fieldstone Land Consultants on behalf of 234 Old Homestead Highway Realty LLC. They are requesting this variance pursuant to the proposed amendment to section 7, article D of the zoning ordinance. We discussed that section at length in our last public hearing. Subject property is shown at tax map 209, lot 1, and is in the industrial park district, also in that table overlay.
Good evening again, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brandon, civil engineer with Fieldstone Land Consultants. And I'll be representing 234 Old Homestead Highway Realty LLC this evening with their variance application from Article 7, Section D of the Wetlands Conservation District. Again, it's the same request under the permitted uses. They currently the proposed modification would not allow wetlands to be crossed. With this particular application, just taking a look at the plan that we have before you this evening, we actually were successful in obtaining the planning board approval at their last meeting for this particular project. So they don't have to speak to it as proposed lots. They're actually existing lots now. So we're talking about this large lot here, which consists of 15.171 acres in size. As you can see, there is a jurisdictional wetland area that comes through and bisects the property, basically, through its southern portion. There is a small area of upland along Sapphire Drive. This is Sapphire Drive here. The property we just talked about is one lot removed over here. So as you're working your way west on Sapphire Drive, you have this property on the right hand side. You have Wilson Pond, road down here, just to the west of this site. So what we have with this property is really an even more extreme, condition. This property has 7.13 acres of upland area on it, and 5.93 acres of that are situated on the north side of this wetland area. There is an existing crossing, a small crossing of this wetland down here in its narrowest location. There's actually a small upland area through here. There's a drainage connection in a very narrow portion right there, where there's an existing footbridge actually that goes over that wetland area. This project would consist, creating a 20 foot wide access road to get to, roughly 6 acres of buildable commercial and industrial land. Would result in a wetland impact of approximately 4,000 square feet. And that's primarily because of the length that we would be widening on each side. Similar to the topic we discussed before, this would be a project that would require a permit through the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services through their Wetlands Bureau. There would be a, pretty substantial watershed study done to appropriately size that crossing. What I would like to just point out too is that evaluation does involve fish and game input. So they actually, from a wildlife biologist standpoint, review those crossings as well to make sure that they, address any concerns that they, would have. So these crossings go through a very significant review at a local, state, and federal level, because ultimately behind the scenes, the Army Corps of Engineer, after we obtain a permit through the state, has 30 days to take jurisdiction, and then EPA has the ability to take jurisdiction as well. And so, I don't want to downplay, the crossing of a wetland. I think it is something that goes through a significant review, and that's why most communities, quite frankly, leave it up to those professionals to evaluate the wetland themselves. Communities generally regulate buffers, not wetland crossings. And so because of that, we are seeking relief from this ordinance. I know we've talked, this is almost the exact application. And, I technically have to go through the criteria and touch on it, but I am gonna touch on it on a little bit lighter level, just out of respect of everybody's time. But wanted to touch on, the specifics of this site. As you can see, it's a large site, but 84% of the lot is on the buildable portion of the lot is on the north side of the wetlands. No other way to get there. Our job from a state standpoint is to avoid and minimize, and we are certainly doing that. You can see this is the narrowest portion to cross. That's the portion that would result in the least amount of impact to the jurisdictional area. That's why we picked this location. If we didn't pick that location, the state would say, nice try. You have to give us a reason why you're not picking the area to avoid and minimize. And there are certain circumstances, I will say, just out of full disclosure, where you would impact a different area. If this was a stream and we could cross a forested wetland in a different location, they would classify that stream as a higher ranking wetland. And so they would prefer us to cross an area that doesn't have concentrated flow. So it's not just the eye test, but in this case, that's the right place to be. There is not a flowing stream through this site. There is a little bit of channelized flow, in this location here. The kind of the larger, I think, wetland kind of heads to the primary runoff of this wetland, I believe, does run just off the site to the north on the other side of this lot. And so that's, a description. There have been a number of people that have inquired about this property, but my client can't entertain going under any kind of an agreement in those conditions until we have successfully secured this, because we had to disclose to those people that this would require a variance technically, and that's why this, it's critical that we're before you now in this project. And so we appreciate the board's time with this, and if there is not any more questions, I'm happy to, kind of segue into the criteria.
Oh, you said there's an existing footbridge there. Is that just across a portion of what you're showing there, or is it?
It's a small portion right here.
Yeah, just across that free flowing area you said.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's not very wide, right?
It's not. Okay. But there is an upland area on this side, kind of a peninsula. You can kind of see it kind of projecting down And so it's a really narrow area that we
So
cross.
those two sections of wetland really connect through that
But
free
for,
flowing area.
Yeah.
There, not much to the rest of where you're showing
correct.
the dark lines there.
So in a case like this, you know, what we would typically do is, you know, for this wetland permit, we would have a pre-application meeting with the Wetlands Bureau, and we would document, you know, the wetland area. And we'd have a meeting with them to determine, do you want a box culvert here, or do you want multiple culverts to try to maintain, you know, continuity between like a hydraulic connection along that entire area.
Yeah, that's my main concern, is that the continuity of the wetland be maintained.
And so that would be evaluated in kind of a pre-hearing, and we're essentially meeting with, at the state, we sit at a table with essentially.
And you would not get the permit unless they agree with what your solution was.
100%, yeah. And they have a number of wetland scientists up there that review, you know, under those same criteria.
And this is a woodland wetland, it's not a free flowing wetland, it's not a marsh, it's not a swamp.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question that probably isn't germane to your application, but a little bit curious / puzzle. You said this has already been approved by the planning board?
Only the subdivision,
Oh, so that's, okay.
yeah,
But
only
the
the.
site plan is not,
No,
okay, yes, thank you.
yeah,
I thought the subdivision was done originally when the district was created, but it was not.
no, we created this subdivision I can share with you because. We have a gentleman under contract to build development here on this western portion. So he was only looking for, you know, about 2 acres of buildable area. This is an area that the town was once considering fire station many years ago now. This location, but it's a nice upland buildable area. So we subdivided that piece off so that sale could go through. So we're moving forward with the site plan application for that going, which is great. But there's been inquiries on this much larger piece out in the back. And, you know, timing is everything. And so what the landowner wants to do is to make sure that we have all the approvals in the wetlands permit in place to get to that area. But I know that there's been some interest. I can't disclose what that interest has been, but you know, hopefully it's not too late, but that's why we're here.
Okay. Please proceed.
So again, this lot's located in the industrial park district, as well as the wetland conservation, economic revitalization zone, and tax increment finance district. We have a 15.171 acre lot, and we're before you asking for approval to access just shy of 6 acres of the buildable area on that lot. The first criteria granting the variance would not be contrary to public interest because again, we are in the industrial park district. We think that's important. We got municipal sewer and water utilities. This is the one of the larger building envelopes within the whole district along Sapphire Drive. And we evaluated both sides of the property, so I can speak to that. This is a very large upland contiguous area that will be very attractive to a substantial user. And so it is very important that my client have the ability to access that area. These districts again exist to stimulate economic growth and facilitate business development. This lot is larger when compared to many that surround it, with a suitable area for a more significant commercial industrial development in the supporting infrastructure being right there along the frontage. It serves the public interest to make the most of the tax investment that the town has really implemented here over this area in the past decade. Granting this variance will allow for the productive use of the lot. Again, this was voted on by the town back in 2020. indicating the expansion of commercial industrial opportunities in Swansea is something that was very important to the voters and to the general public. Allowing for a wetland crossing to access the rear of this lot will not change the character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. It is our belief that this proposal will have no negative impacts to the public. The proposed wetland crossing will meet all other local and state requirements, and the crossing will be designed to minimize impacts, will utilize best management practices, and will require appropriate permitting through the Department of Environmental Services Wetlands Bureau. And for these reasons, we believe that granting a variance will not be contrary to the public interest. Moving on, if you don't mind. Moving on to number 2, if the variance were granted, the spirit of the ordinance would be observed because we believe this proposed wetland crossing is reasonable as we believe it does meet the spirit and intent of the ordinance, especially when you consider the reasonable manner in which the crossing is proposed. Again, minimizing, the impacts and environmental impacts. One of the purposes of the Wetlands Conservation Overlay District is to prevent development of structures and land uses on wetlands, which would contribute to the pollution of surface and groundwater. By meeting all of the other local and state requirements with this proposed crossing, we believe we can safely access the usable portion of this lot without polluting or negatively impacting the wetlands. Another stated purpose of the district is to encourage those uses that can be appropriately and safely located in wetland areas. And we believe a responsibly built crossing would satisfy this purpose and would prevent the destruction of the wetlands. State regulations would closely govern the installation and maintenance of any approved crossing, and crossings will provide access to an otherwise landlocked property and access to property that has been contemplated for development in the districts where this property lies. The wetland crossing will not threaten the health, safety, or welfare of the public. And again, for these reasons, we believe granting this variance would observe the spirit of the ordinance. Moving on to number 3, granting the variance would do substantial justice. Granting this variance would allow for the productive development over a 15.171 acre lot. The proposal is to access the dry upland, the largest dry upland portion of the lot, where the most contiguous developable area exists. Denying this variance would result in a land taking from the owner, as 5.9 acres of their property would be rendered useless in any useless as it would be inaccessible in any meaningful way. The gain realized by the public in denying this wetland crossing is far outweighed by the benefit realized, again, as I stated before, we believe by both parties. We think there's a benefit here not only to the landowner, but there is a benefit to the general public when you consider the zoning that we're in here, industrial district, ERZ, and TIF districts. Granting this variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood or threaten the health, safety, or general welfare of the public. And for these reasons, we believe granting this variance would do substantial justice and not allow for the productive use of a large tract of land. We do believe that this proposal is certainly reasonable and a reasonable use for the property. Moving on to number 4, if the variance were granted, the values of the surrounding properties would not be diminished. Again, we think in an industrial park setting, this is what the town really is seeking: compatible use, industrial, commercial industrial development would be compatible with the surroundings. We're not proposing a use that is not in harmony with the surroundings. So we think any development here would be positive and have positive impacts to surrounding properties. And that's been our experience over the last 25 years. Compatible uses have positive impacts on surrounding properties, and we've stated such in our application. Moving on to number 5. This is the unnecessary hardship. And the first part is, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property because. We certainly believe this property is unique given its size and location. As I stated before, this particular portion of the property has one of the largest, if not the largest, contiguous upland buildable area within the industrial park area along Sapphire Drive. That alone is certainly, special conditions that distinguish it from other properties in the area. Granting this variance would allow for the productive use of the property. The zoning for the proposed lot again is in the industrial park district as well as the TIF and ERZ districts. It is our belief that the development of this large acreage property is reasonable and fair when you contemplate the purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision on the property. This proposal seeks a variance to permit the creation of a wetland crossing to access a very significant developable portion of the land. The unique shape of the wetland area on the lot and its position on the property, create a special conditions as well, unique conditions, and a denial of a crossing would pose an unnecessary hardship for the owner. Strict application of the proposed zoning ordinance change would require the property owner to relinquish access and use of almost 6 acres of their commercial industrial land. And frankly, the majority of the buildable portion of that land. The owner has a right to use and develop, their land, and restricting that would be a land taking, in our opinion. Typically, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Wetlands Bureau is the governing entity on wetland impacts, as they are granted permission from the Army Corps of Engineers to regulate this. The crossing as designed, or as will be designed, will meet all state and federal guidelines and minimize impacts to the jurisdictional areas, as we touched on, and the proposed crossing can be constructed safely and responsibly. We therefore believe there is no fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance provision and the specific application of that provision to the property. And moving on to the second prong, the proposed use is a reasonable one because I think we've touched on, all of those points really. We essentially are restating a lot of the same points here. We're asking to cross in a wetland, but also designing a crossing that's going to minimize any of those impacts in order to reasonably develop a commercial industrial property in town. Certainly that interest is compatible with all of the other, regulations and the history here with the TIF and the ERZ district. And so we believe this proposal is reasonable and should be allowed. And we think that it's, frankly beneficial to all parties. Part B, if the criteria in subparagraph A are not established, explain how an unnecessary hardship will be deemed to exist if and only if owing to the special conditions of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area. The property cannot be reasonably used in conformance with the ordinance, and a variance is therefore necessary to enable a reasonable use of the property because I say a lot of the same things here, but I'll just summarize by saying 80% of the buildable portion of this property is situated on the north side of the wetland. And not allowing somebody to access that is certainly unreasonable. Therefore, allowing that has to be reasonable. And anything contrary to that, in our opinion, would be, a violation of the land owner's rights, and would be a land taking. And so.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Opening up the public. Is there any other comments the board has or the public at large like to add? Yes, sir.
Just have a question on the crossing. Will the sewer, water and electricity be in that area also?
Yes, that's a good question. The sewer, water, electric would all cross in that same area. And that would, again, be part of, avoiding and minimizing impact is consolidating all of those impacts to that one area.
Any other questions by the board? All right, we comfortable to move on to questions? I'm going to close the public aspects of the hearing. And let's go to the questions. Is there any discussion amongst the board? Where they go? Ready? Ready? Okay, here we go. Could the variance be granted without being contrary to the public interest? Lisa?
I say yes, because the public voted for that to be our industrial park, so it's in tune with the public interest. So yes.
Okay. We'll reverse, Joe.
I'd say yes, agreeing with both the applicant statement and what was just stated.
Jessica.
I agree, yes, for the reasons that Joe and Lisa stated.
Okay, Jay.
Yes, because the public interest is the protection of the wetlands, and I see no reason to believe that this proposal will prevent the wetlands from being connected and maintained, subject to DES approval of the connections, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't see any reason that the public interest is damaged by this proposal.
And I will say, yes, I'll echo Lisa's sentiments as well. I think the public interest in this case is to develop this land. And I think it's done in a way that does not jeopardize the public's interest. So, yes. Would the spirit of the ordinance be observed if the variance were granted? Joe?
Yeah, again, this and A are the first element of five, are the ones I struggle with. I'm gonna say yes.
Hey, Jessica.
I say yes, because the ordinance is to protect the wetlands, and he's explained that they're going to avoid as much as possible, minimize the impact. They've obviously selected the most narrow place they can cross, therefore affecting the least amount of wetlands. And oh, and then the public comment too, that they're, everything's gonna be right in that area. So I say yes.
Thank you. Jay.
I say that the spirit of the ordinance would be observed, and for some of the same reasons I said before, which was that the wetlands are not likely to be damaged by this, but also the way the ordinance is written, and the fact that there is already a footbridge there, since we're replacing the existing lawfully located structure with something that's better, a roadway, in which case it's bigger, so we're not really replacing it in the sense that we are improving it. But the spirit of the ordinance as written was to maintain access, and in that sense, that very subjectively interpreted piece of language would allow me to say that the spirit of the ordinance was not to deny access that was already there. In this case, we're talking about more access, foot access, but vehicle access, but it's still access. And in that sense, there was access to this upland portion of the property before, and I see no reason to deny access to it now.
Thank you, Jay. Lisa.
I say yes, I agree with Jay. I don't see, I don't know if any of you have ever had to get a permit from DES to do anything on your property, but they put you through your paces. There, I don't see any way that this would negatively impact, as long as they follow the DES guidelines.
And I will echo the sentiments of everyone here. I think you've covered what I would say, so I'm not gonna repeat it. So yes. I agree.
I just want to make a further comment, not changing my vote at all, but I went back and read the planning board minutes where these proposed ordinance changes were discussed. And in reading those minutes, I don't get any better sense of the objective of the ordinances. In fact, I find the minutes somewhat wanting, but it doesn't give you any insight. So I think it makes our job, and assuming it passed, code enforcement's job very, very difficult.
All right, with the granting the variance to substantial justice. Jessica.
Yes, because of the districts, the ERD and the TIF districts. And as was stated, I mean, the majority of this lot, in order to develop this land is you have to cross the wetlands in order to get to it. I think it does both the landowner and the town justice to grant the variance.
I agree for the same reasons that Jessica.
Okay, Lisa.
I agree for the same reasons stated justice.
Okay. And Joe.
I'll take your approach in that not granting it will create an injustice.
And I agree as well. I think the public interest here is development of the land, this particular land, and protection of the wetlands. So I think substantial justice is being done all on the board in terms of granting this ordinance. So, yes. Could the variance, granted this variance, not ordinance. Could the variance be granted without diminishing surrounding property values? Lisa.
I say yes. I can only see that it would increase the values in that area.
Joe.
I'd say yes, and I'd agree with Lisa.
Jessica.
I'd say yes, we haven't heard anything to the contrary. I think it would be encouraging for further development. Businesses, other businesses that have improved and gone through and development.
Great success, okay. Jay.
Yes, I agree, and I think that Jessica's last point was very good, so I would agree with both of those.
And I would definitely agree myself with all sentiments. We haven't heard anything to the contrary, and I do agree with the sentiment of, when development starts occurring, it's first one. So that's the purpose of this whole area, so. Yes. Do special conditions to the property exist that distinguish it from other properties in the area, Jack?
I think the same thing we talked about before, it's in the industrial area, which is a definite special condition. Given other properties in the general area, and also the fact that it's inaccessible without crossing the wetland, certainly distinguishes it.
Jessica.
I would say yes, because it's virtually undevelopable.
Without crossing. Okay, Joe.
I agree with Jessica's comments.
Okay, and
Yes.
and yes. I jumped the gun there. So, Lisa.
I'm a yes, because we don't cross that wetlands, 84% of the buildable property can't be used. So yes.
And I would say yes as well, and this seems to be one of the larger portions of land in this entire area that would be unaccessible otherwise. So in that case alone, I think you see some special conditions being owed to it. So I would say yes and agree with everyone's sentiments as well. Yes. All right, owing to the special condition of the property that distinguish it from other properties in the area, there is not a fair and substantial relationship between the general public purpose of the ordinance and the specific application of the provision to the property. We struggle a little bit with language and we want to take a stab. I don't want to put anyone on the spot. I'm going to, but.
I'll start off because
Okay.
I was delaying everybody last time. I think that the special conditions, which are that this is only accessible through the wetlands, access to the wetlands. And this general purpose of the ordinance is to protect the wetlands, and this application of the provision does not harm the wetlands. I've seen no fair and substantial relationship between them.
Excellent, thank you, Jack.
Let's say that.
You did, yeah.
We're gonna get this one, I promise. Especially if this passes, we're gonna be doing this quite a bit. So, Jessica,
I would say yes for the same reasons. The general public purpose of the ordinance is to protect and avoid restricting flow of the wetlands, and he's established that they're gonna follow the state regulations and, go through that whole process. So I do not see any fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the ordinance and the specific application. Yes.
yes. Joe,
Again, I'll abstain on this one. I just wish there was language somewhere, give me better insight into the objective of the ordinance. No, beyond the obvious one of effective.
okay, Lisa,
I'm going to say yes, because of the special conditions in number 5.
okay. And I will agree with the sentiments of Jay, Jessica, and Lisa on this one. I agree. I think that they're taking consideration the spirit of the ordinance here and the general purpose of the developable land. So I would say yes. All right, and lastly, not necessarily lastly, I'm sorry. Okay, it would be potentially. Is the proposed use a reasonable one, Jessica? And that would be crossing the wetlands. Is that
Yes.
okay?
I say yes. For the reasons that. I'm just thinking, so I can speak to this. The district that we voted as a town to develop, and this is the way forward in doing that. So yes, it's reasonable.
Excellent, thank you, Jessica. Joe,
I would say yes, the lot is virtually unusable. Without limits.
Lisa,
Yes, I agree with Joe.
and Jay.
Yes, it's reasonable to connect the buildable portion of the property to the access road. To the Sapphire.
So yes. I will say yes as well. I mean, it's a reasonable use in that it's providing access to, the buildable portion of this property, but I think it's done in a reasonable format in terms of the, reducing, eliminating, and trying to, reduce the impact as much as possible to the wetland. So I think it's a reasonable approach as well. Yes. All right, we do not have to go any further. At this point, we are once again virtually in lockstep with yeses across the board, so I will entertain a motion.
Can I just say, I found this particular application, both is, ones we vote on tonight, much easier because they're in the industrial park. I hope we don't have a whole bunch of variances coming up, because the thing passes on election day, but if we do, I'm just saying it's gonna be harder for me because, there isn't the conflicting ordinance which establishes this is a developmental area, so we'll have to see how that all goes, I just want to say that.
Appreciate
But
that.
this is, these things are special because they are in the industrial park, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm gonna need a little bit more help from whoever's proposing this in the future, like you, Chad, and some other place to get by the variance criteria.
Let's see
What happens,
see what happens, and if we have to cross that bridge,
right? But
we will.
unless anybody else wants to say anything, I want to just move that we accept we approve the variance in this case. For this particular application, ZBA 25-004.
Second.
Mr. Seconds. All right, there's been a motion, it's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, okay, I've got a question, more just curiosity. Now, if the motion passes, the variance is accepted, the variance goes with the lot, how quickly does it have to be implemented? Or is it for 2 years? So 2 years from when it's approved, it has to be implemented.
Some substantial activity on the property development.
And the other question I have for Adam is,
Can the owner ask for an extension? Okay.
can I just ask what Adam wanted the question, and that is that if, for instance, the ordinance does not pass, then this variance becomes moot. But if the
How are you doing?
so do we ever have to consider this again?
That's a question for Cordell, and
We
I
wouldn't
don't
be
think so.
subject to new regulations if we
Yeah.
act on the.
Yes.
variance.
Right.
So if we don't act on it, then it starts over.
Right.
yeah, there's some nuance where,
So they still have to do something in 2 years.
right. The problem becomes if we don't adopt this amendment, but we adopt a similar amendment next, I don't wanna get into that
But
yet,
this
because
is-
that's
There's a
not.
lot of ifs, ands, and
Yeah.
buts.
Yeah.
But as it stands today, that's the understanding of the.
Exactly.
variance
Thank you.
would apply.
Can we just clarify just for everybody's edification that if we get a site plan approval, that technically utilizes the variance, and so it can extend out further than 2 years, because then we would be operating under the site plans timeframe.
There is an RSA that states that essentially site plan approval and variance approval will go hand in hand, and it'll follow the one with the longer time.
The longer.
It'll go with the site plan approval essentially, so.
But if the ordinance
All right,
changes in 23.
hold on. We have a motion on the table, it's been seconded, let's vote on it.
Sorry.
All right, so all those in favor, I mean, is there any further discussion? I don't want to stop that. It's related to the ordinance or to what we're dealing with this particular variance. I'm open to talking about it. Otherwise, we talk about it after. Okay, so all those in favor, please say so by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, I believe the ayes won, it's unanimous.
Thank you very much, I appreciate your time.
All right.
Thanks for your time, Chad.
How long do you have to implement a site plan? Well, we have 2 years to get an approval for that, and then a site plan approval is good for 1 year. 1 year, okay. Until you break ground. So I know interpretation too sometimes.
Yeah,
That would make substantial progress on the site plan within a year, or they can ask for an extension. Correct.
Which is not clearly defined.
Right.
Just a few quick points.
Yep.
Greatly appreciate this, because we haven't been able to market the property since the amendment went through. We did lose the opportunity to participate in a 30,000 square foot healthcare facility that they're looking to locate in Cheshire County. We had people interested in this site, but once the amendment went on the ballot, we couldn't present it because they could only present property without zoning issues. and the application deadline is Wednesday. Maybe we could have if we'd been heard a week ago, but even that would have been tough because they'd have to do a phase one environmental and some other studies. So once this amendment was forwarded to the warrant, we lost that opportunity, which was really a shame. It's part of the reason why the Board of Selectmen pushed so hard back against these, but I greatly appreciate this scope. So now we can market it, and we do have some interest in it. Alex Torpe is our temporary town administrator. He's in the office on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm in the office Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays for limited hours. Each of the members of the Board of Selectmen have taken 2 departments to act as liaisons for those departments, and mine are town hall, or this one is town hall and also the fire department. Alex is coordinating a training session for the Board of Selectmen on the 17th. He's going to go over what the duties are for select board members. He's offered the opportunity to do a training for zoning board and planning board. He would do it, or the municipal association would do it. So I would ask you to get to your chair and let your chair know whether you're interested or not. We did this back, I think it was during COVID. I think it was 2020. We had about 6 or 7 people who participated. It would have been great if we'd had everybody, because everybody would benefit from it. Joe, your question, Jay, the one you all struggle with, that's a question that could be dealt with in that format. And then lastly, I just want to let you know what a tremendous job Adam not only is doing in general, but with regard to these 2 variances. He struggled with these. His opinion was we didn't need the variances. Chad's opinion was some towns require it, some towns don't. So that's why Adam did the extra work and consulted with our town's attorneys, and that's how we ended up here. So greatly appreciate your participation in this, because I know if I was sitting in your chair, I would have been asking the question, why are we doing this? But Adam did that extra work to get it on firm legal ground. So
Yeah, the deal still did a lot of legwork too. So
Yeah, everybody's been very helpful.
excellent. So.
thank
And
you.
then just one last thing, you touched on it at the very beginning. Sherry Domina and the Conservation Commission have put a tremendous amount of work into redefining wetlands and the restrictions. The one aspect that wasn't considered was the unintended consequences. And so Chad presented to the Board of Selectmen in January. Once we understood what was impacted, we submitted a letter to the planning board, and we were successful, all except for this one. But Chad did a great job, and he's volunteered to offer his service to the Conservation Commission as needed. So we're very fortunate.
And they've reached out. So
Yeah, we're gonna meet with you in a couple of,
Yeah.
Sherry and myself and another person are gonna meet with you, and Victoria are gonna meet with you. We'll work on this, get it done.
we look forward to it. So,
Yep.
thank you.
Thanks, Chad.
You're all set for tomorrow night, Garrett. You got all your cables?
Okay, any further business that we'd like to discuss?
early, I'm bringing my manager with me.
I think we did a very good job. I think everybody was, I think some new faces, and I appreciate what you've been doing, and what do you think? You coming back again?
I will be here next week though.
No.
Really quick, we have a motion. That we can second.
What's that?
We have a motion. We
Oh,
can
I
second.
got on Facebook, you know, about
Can we vote?
Oh,
my wife.
so motion to adjourn has been, all those in favor?
I'm the-
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Thank you, guys.
There you go.
They're really excited, so I've been here. Working against.
Yeah.
So.